Good afternoon to you all, and thank you for staying with us into the heart of the day, because we are just reconvening for our last two sessions. I think that a lot of issues we are going to discuss now were already dealt with during the first part of our workshop. But it's always interesting to go back to a few issues, and I would like to frame it very briefly, if you allow me, to try to understand better what we are going to do in this next hour. We have, in a very complicated geopolitical and geoeconomical landscape, two things that stand out in my view. First of all, the world's energy and digital transitions ultimately rest on African geology. And the reality is that Africa has a commanding share of the resource, but a sliver of its worth. The second factor that is very important is that the world has learned twice recently and rather painfully, first with problems coming from Russian gas, and secondly with the Strait of Hormuz, that the routes and the refineries it leans on can be turned into instruments of pressure overnight. And supply chains, as you know, are no longer only commercial. Minerals become a form of power. In a nutshell, route security is now strategic. So this is very important that we understand where we stand, because for Africa in particular, it should be leverage. It has to be leverage, because the resilience anyone else is now scrambling for runs straight through this continent. So how can things be different this time? This is the question we are going to try to address through two elements that were already discussed this morning. First, we have to understand how minerals and digital technologies are coming up together to try to understand that this is really the future of the continent. And we are a series of experts. We have also a series of vantage points that are very interesting. And I want to make the connection with our four speakers, because we will have 4 points of views that will be discussed here. We will have the policy part, we will have the satellite, we will have the corridor, and we will have also the people. And to help us with that, we have experts ready to commit to this. Let me, if I can, begin with the former minister, Dr. Kayode Fayemi, former Minister of Mines and Steel Development in Nigeria. And I would like to begin with a very general question, and to understand a bit better what would it take, and the example of Nigeria might be very relevant here, what would it take to move from a raw supplier in terms of policy, capital, technology, to refiner and maker, and why is this moment very different from past moments?
Thank you, moderator. Let me join our previous colleagues in thanking the organizers at the ECSSR and the IFA in Ethiopia. It's always a delight to be in these conversations. Moderator, you've asked what it would take to move from the traditional old practice of being the raw material supplier to a refiner and co-rule maker rather than just a recipient of other rules made elsewhere. But before I go into that, allow me, sir, to also make a distinction. I mean, the topic talks about disruption and critical minerals, and you've repeated that. I often have a problem with this terminology, critical minerals. And for me, the question is critical for who?
Yeah.
Is it critical for those who want the minerals, or critical for us as Africans, the supplier? And what is critical? Is it just battery, so-called green energy minerals? Or to us in Africa that are still chasing after industrial capacity, where does that leave limestone that we need in our rail development and in our infrastructure development? Where does it leave gold to the Botswana and the Namibians? And where does it leave people who have minerals but that are not necessarily battery minerals, cobalt, lithium, platinum, you name it? Collectively, for us in Africa, we hold at least 30% of the mineral resources required in the world. If you go by US geological surveys or even our own data on the continent. And Africa has tried to address that challenge of the past because there are three converging factors that I see now. First is the strategic competition that is changing the landscape in the world. From that unipolar moment dominated by the West to the resurgence of China, to the critical importance of middle powers, the UAEs and the Indias and the Indonesia, and a whole range of middle powers that are also critical players in that space, competing. And then our own place in that landscape as Africans, with our 1.5 billion people. How do we use that leverage? Because you used that word, and I think it's critical. How do you use that leverage to redirect the shape of current strategic development from being raw materials provider to being producers of wealth? And Africa has thought about this. There is an African mining vision, if we want to localize it to mining. There's a mining vision that the African Union and African ministers developed in 2009 that has been ratified by majority of the African countries. And that mining vision clearly articulates what is required to move from that source of raw materials to local beneficiation and value addition as the way to go. But the challenge is always in the detail. If you're saying local beneficiation, that everybody agrees with that. But when you now tend to practicalize local beneficiation, we run into challenges. I mean, some countries in Africa have started that process. Zimbabwe directed that all miners in 2024 must beneficiate and add value to lithium that is produced in Zimbabwe. And of course, in that process, all that we saw happen was that the Chinese miners who were dominant in Zimbabwe just started producing liquid lithium and still shipping out the liquid lithium rather than producing batteries locally in Zimbabwe. And it's not exclusively the fault of the Chinese manufacturers. If we're going to achieve that refining capacity you're talking about, we must also improve our own local infrastructure. Electricity, water, all of the requirements that would be necessary in achieving refining. And we've seen an example with the recent challenge you mentioned in Strait of Hormuz. If in Nigeria we have not successfully put in place the local refining capacity by the Dangote refinery that produces 650,000 liters of refined petroleum, we would have been in a hot soup. in light of the crisis that the American-Iran war brought about. And majority of African countries depended on Nigeria's refining capacity in order to bridge that gap. That's precisely what Dangote company was also able to do in the cement manufacturing space on the African continent. And it now has manufacturing capacity in at least 15 African countries, including Ethiopia here. Dangote produces cement here in Ethiopia for all the local infrastructure production that we see here. So we must demonstrate capacity, and to demonstrate capacity at the local level, we must guarantee predictability of our own manufacturing space. And what a country like UAE, one of those middle powers I talk about, can do is achieve strategic partnership, not just as an investor, but as a local driver of those industrial opportunities in African countries. Third, Africans must stop operating in silos. Because once we approach any competition as 54 countries, the opportunity for divide and rule is greater. But if we come into it as a collective, as a bloc, representing our interest, which of course will be national, but also can be regional, then it's easier for us to negotiate from a position of strength. These are things that I think, in a nutshell, we need to put in place in order to improve the ability of the continent to become a refiner rather than just a producer, and repeat the resource course and the paradox of plenty, in which we have all the resources and yet the suffering has not disappeared from our continent. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and this is obviously complicated by what you said, the geopolitical environment, where on one side you have China, who has a long a bit of having 19 of 20 minerals in the continent. On the other side, you have the United States of America with a new trade, not aid motto, which we can see in the Lobito corridor, of which we can speak a bit also later on. But at the same time, the place of the UAE is very important, because there is repeated calls for the UAE to be a real partner in this exercise of helping the continent to be able not to just take resources, but help develop the capacity for the benefit of the people, the constituents, the people of the continent. So how can now, and I would like to go to Mr. Noemi, how can technology help in this? Has technology changed the rules of the game? In which ways, and how it can bridge the gap that we are seeing now?
So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you to give us this opportunity to speak and show the cooperation between the United Arab Emirates and Africa. So from my view, we are seeing now a clear shift from the resource-based model to a decision-based model. So the value now is increasing, driven by the intelligence and, the earth observation and smart solution. And this, technology is now giving the governments the capability to improve their exploration and monitor their environment. So in practical life now, we as a smart solution and satellite provider, we are providing our platform, which is fed by the data and the raw data they have it to generate, useful information that can be used in different parts in agriculture, in border controls, and oil and gas. So this kind of platform, I'll say, or intelligent AI capability enable the governments to manage their resources and to even to reduce the cost for exploring new areas and controlling the minerals. So I think now by combining the data, the raw data with the AI, so that will generate a platform or intelligent platform, so it can reduce the effort and the cost that can be served to increase, the country for exploration and see new parts in their development.
Yeah, it can serve exploration, but it can serve also monitoring. It can curb illicit flows. Probably it leapfrog infrastructure. So I think there are many aspects of AI that can help.
Yes.
In this.
Yes. Yeah. So this is what we say that this is the benefit of AI. So AI, it's the feed, or it's gathering all the data and put it in many platforms that will help in different sectors, as we say. So, for example, now we have a great experience here in Africa in agriculture, that building the platform that will see exactly the planets, how it's grow, and it will give the data and the report for the leaders, just to give them the right decision and how they can improve and how they can move to have more visibility and understanding of the agriculture. On other side, on the mining, also we are providing like a different solution for a different country, just to control the mining. So by having registered people that they have their license for mining. Otherwise, having a different people going to many places and do the mining, that it's affecting badly on the economic of the countries.
So we have many advantages of technology. So we went from capacity building to technology, but without the corridors, without the coast, we cannot do anything, because we have to ship these minerals and deal with transit costs, choke points, and at the same time build infrastructure that is very necessary to move these minerals. So we are in a region and in a zone that is very important in this aspect. So, Mr. Hafsi, from the Horn and the Red Sea, we see the UAE becoming a force that moves African ports and logistics significantly. So, how do states keep that connectivity as an asset, rather than being a dependency?
Well, first of all, the infrastructure is built by a nation. It belongs, it's part of their sovereignty. But in Africa, 38 countries are bestowed with coastal or littoral coastal states, and only 16 are inland. And all the ports that have been made, or infrastructure put on, has been established as a way of also being a trade nodal or an export nodal for the inland countries. With that in mind, now speaking on critical minerals buried in an inland country will just be a geology. It will not help that country if the connectivity and the infrastructure is not being put in place for the export. And in this case, I will say that instead of using the Africa's old model of extractive model of shipping raw materials, like Zambia would ship copper through Tanzania, I think refining and then building the capacities, of course, the related industries on inland, so that a finished product could be shipped through the ports. And that will increase an economic growth, provide a lot of jobs for the country. And that the most recommended ideal has been spoken very much by a lot of people today, is that no more extractive model for Africa. It has to have a value addition and a value creation within that. My other point is that it will require creating the logistic aspect of it. Investments has to be made in order to increase not only the extraction but the processing facilities, and including the connectivity that is required to ship them if that technology is going to be shipped on. I would use a Swiss model. Switzerland does not produce heavy equipment. It produces finished products. So I think that's the most ideal as far as the extractive, the rare minerals are concerned, that makes chips, semiconductors, AI technology, and all that related things.
Let me further this question briefly. When we look at the what Washington is doing right now with the Lobito corridor model, it's which brings Angola, the Congo, and Zambia all together. So what they are doing is that it's not only a rail line, it's also something else. It's also a trade agreement that set preferential offtake terms and with transparency conditions, with as well prioritized financing. So it's an overall model that is posed to change the way we understand the corridors nowadays. So when we look at the UAE Berbera, for example, the corridor that is being pitched now, what makes a port nowadays a good deal for the country?
I mean, the service provision, the port has to have, to be competitive in terms of its trade provision. It has to have connectivity in terms of a road network to inland countries, and then it has to be at least to have the capacity to handle large volumes of goods. The 3 C's in handling, and avoid congestion and all that thing. I would think national governments should develop on their part the infrastructure network that builds up that connects it to the port. Maybe for Kenya we have LAPSET coming into Ethiopia and partly going to South Sudan. Those common sort of facilities should be developed in a way so that at least the port would serve the inland countries. The mechanisms that they can use African free trade. There's enough protocols or mechanisms to use. And then national governments should remove a lot of trade barriers and create a conducive environment for investments, as well as inter-Africa trade and sort of the connectivity as a whole.
Okay, so if we have the policy, if we have the help of AI, if we have the corridors and the proper routes with a proper infrastructure, then we move to the other important question with Professor McKenna. How do all these disruptive technologies, I don't like disruptive because there are new technologies and digital platforms, advanced data analytics, they are reshaping really the diplomatic and multilateral engagement in Africa. So how can you understand what type of opportunities, what type of challenges this presents for African countries in particular in this great power competition, how they can still build some sort of strategic autonomy? So this is a question very important as well, which connects also with what the minister said at the beginning, the agency that you can build through these technologies.
Thank you. I also want to thank the organizers for inviting us and to discuss such an important topic. I was in the confession when I said like a disruption, right? So I have diplomacy. You think of the handshakes, all the carefully choreographed state visits, and but also I like disruption. I'm a trained sociologist, so when I was learning about Karl Marx's theories, I kind of like, okay, so I think when I was preparing for this, I said, okay, I think disruption is a good thing, especially the kind that keep diplomats outlined. So right now, diplomacy and disruption collide in a single urgent question. So how do we keep human art of diplomacy while machines are rewriting the rules of power. So I think that's an important opportunity class. So in the 21st century, right, talk about these disruptive technologies. You have data is a very strategic national asset. You have AI as a strategic capability. Cybersecurity is a strategic necessity. And digital sovereignty, very strategic imperative. So nations that effectively integrate these four elements into their diplomatic and multilateral agreements will be better in terms of safeguarding their interests, strengthening resilience and sustainable development. So Africa engagement with these forms of technology is really unfolding at the moment, and they shape many aspects of life, including economic power, governance capacity, and geopolitical influence. And but digital sovereignty is at the center. The ability of states in general to control digital infrastructure in the innovative innovation pathway, I think is very critical. So if you think of disruptive these technologies, on one hand, you have these tools that give Africa really superpowers, and I'll say they can verify trade claims, they can track climate platforms, they can fast check trade powers promises in real time. That is the leverage that we talk about Africa, that Africa never had. But on the other hand, if Africa does not shape how these technologies are built and governed, it just risks becoming a passenger in its own foreign policy. So the same algorithm that keep Africa, that help Africa can also use to monitor influence and lock Africa into an eco-dependency kind of partnership. So there are many opportunities. I'm just going to list like two with regard to these kind of technologies. The first one is just learning the analytical fields. So it allows small foreign ministries, if I could use that term, to punch about it. And what I mean, like they can model data, climate scenario, tracking commitments, and preparing positions without large delegations in scenarios capacity gaps in whether it's WTO, UNFCCC, and AU summits. But there's another opportunity. I mean, I think coordinating position. The former minister talked about turning the 54 countries into one voice. I think these platforms, these digital platforms, can really help whether it's AU or the regional economic communities align ahead of UN votes or climate talks and just having African form one position. But there are challenges as well. The digital dependence, because we see there are very few players who are the strong players, because you have the US, you have China, you have EU, but also the Gulf, especially the East, becoming one of the strong. And sometimes, like, to align with one of them, it will be seen that you are choosing a camp. So that's the challenge. But another challenge I see is the capacity gap. I think that in the previous panel, I think one of the panelists talked about how we should just rush it with AI and all that. What is the level of technology that is needed? But I think if we don't, if Africa really doesn't have the capacity, the infrastructures, and the resources to really to align and to be on the same level playing field, I think it's going to be a challenge. So what I can say is that I think it will be important to see how African countries, as one voice, navigate this red competition and build strategic autonomy, especially in forums like AU and but also with the big powers in this space. And critical, I think, is to strengthen digital infrastructure and resilience, but also to actively participate in these conversations. because you cannot be part of it if you don't participate in the conversation that shape, like this kind of technologies. And I talk about capacity as a challenge, but I think it's very important to invest both in the national capacity, but also regional cooperation, building skills, partnerships, and share AI ecosystem to enhance competitiveness and influence. So I'll stop there.
No, thank you. So, yeah, competitiveness is very important in the sector, but I would like to come back, and it's a bit a general question for everybody in this panel about competition, because we have seen there is an intensifying competition for these minerals, for different powers, great powers, middle powers, and others in the African continent. How do you think the African states can hold their agency? I mean, getting better terms, getting what this type of beneficiation we were speaking about, the transparency, no new dependency on processing or technology. So all these factors, can you also create jobs, create skills for the population? How can you create growth as well, rather than another enclave economy? So this is a question that might be important for us to understand a bit better. Please, Minister, or whoever wants to take the floor. If the audience, please, wants to ask questions as well, please raise your hand and I will see you.
I think your question is really the bottom line. It's what happens to the citizens at the end of the day. And for us, one of the critical success factors is strengthening governance capacity itself and reducing elite patronage. Because in many of our countries, the challenge is not lack of policy. It is lack of policy consistency and regulatory consistency, which then outsiders coming to do business without the best of intentions tend to get in the way by colluding with the local elites and creating a patronage framework that then undermines the fiscal regulatory framework that we've put in place, local ownership, strengthen governance, and then ultimately the creation of jobs and all of the issues that you've raised. So I think we need to address governance capacity, but we also need to address the trade architecture. I'm talking the world trade architecture now, not just Africa, because it's been totally lopsided against the African continent. And that is what then leads to that dependence on raw materials extraction rather than genuine partnership that can increase local ownership and productivity locally. So I think, and that's where the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement comes in. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to get it off the ground the way it really should. And we need to pay much more attention to that. The third for me is sovereign debt question. Again, Africa has suffered more than any other continent on that. The cost of capital, the cost of infrastructure, to put an average rail development is 4 times what you're going to spend in UAE or in Europe. So if you don't have patient capital that can make itself available for that, then you're always going to be at a disadvantage. So we need to address cost of capital. We need to recognize what Africa has. And I believe Africa is not cash starved. Africa is cash trapped. And it's cash trapped because a lot of the illicit financial flows that Africa suffers from can be addressed by the way we organize the partnership between ourselves and the rest of the world. And UAE has a critical role to play here. we can build this partnership the way we've been discussing in a manner that benefits a middle power like UAE without Africa suffering any fundamental loss, if that partnership is targeted at the citizenry in both places. Finally, we must take into account demography. By 2050, 1 in every 4 persons in the entire globe is African.
Yeah.
The median age in Africa is 19. In China and the United States is 38. They're dealing with an aging population. We have a younger population, but what's the skills base of that young population? So it's an area of focus, and our partnership with countries like UAE should help with that. Ultimately, we need to also get our act together and work together more collaboratively as Africans. Rather than people taking us to China for FOCAC and you invite 54 African heads of states to go and sit in Beijing, or well, at least France has remodeled that a little. France came to Nairobi thanks to President Ruto recently. But the challenge is, let all of them come to Addis Ababa. This is our capital, or they should go to our regional capitals. And let's do the negotiations there after we've already figured out what we want. Because the Africa we want is in the Agenda 2063. It's clear. How do we get there? What do we need to do to get there? That's our problem, but it's also a collective problem for the world. Because if you don't fix Africa, Africa that is the next frontier, the growth capital of the next century, then the world will remain in crisis. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. F.
Thank you. It was well said by my fellow panelists. I think much work has to go into national governments, what they need to do, which means that the priorities should be set in a way that resource extraction should really focus on the value addition and the finished products for the benefit of its people. But what the professor said, I'll still echo it, that should that model, should it be driven by a political elite, then we are into the old extractive model of, shipping minerals as ores or raw material. National governments should also produce a conducive environment for investments. They can seek partnership with UAE. UAE can come with expertise. It has already built ports in Eastern Africa. Connectivity, getting sort of political commitments and attracting investments would require many things to come into place. So national governments should be ready to do that one. I think they can also agree in producing those materials. Of course, the youth bulge, there's a huge population in Africa that are employable. It will be employable for the next years to come. That can be used as the human capital will also be there at the same time. So I think those things takes two to tango. It should happen from the African side as well, African governments.
So I think also the focusing on technology, and I see that technology is an enabler that is not a substitute to it. And for me, I see like for Africa to bridge this divide, the whole vision creation is important. And I look at the different actors, whether it's academia, whether it's governments, should be the lead, research actors and techs who can copy solutions to both be inclusive and be context sensitive, and especially Africa needs to have Africa-led AI strategy with a local context in mind. And I think that there is a lot of these challenges that we are talking about. And I'm really struggling with this dependency when it comes to whether it's future technologies so if Africa comes together as one and with one voice, and also just have our foreign policies, for instance, and then policy right, within their policies to ensure, especially data and security, kind of becomes central on the engagement. And then that best issues of best issues, not who's best, and so I think that is important. The technology should be just aligned, but not that's.
Dr. Nuhaimi?
So as they said, I think it's not only about minerals, but it's building a full economic and ecosystem. So the combination of the space technology and the AI digital platform, will create a new category and jobs in the future for in different types, geospatially analysis, AI engineering. So having the technology, it will open the doors for a new kind of careers, and that will open the doors for many others just to join this segment.
Okay. Is there any question from the room? Yes, please. One of our stellar PhD and future diplomat.
First of all, I want to thank the panelists for this discussion. And my question addresses everyone in the panel. And just to wrap up everything that was said, the challenges that are being faced when it comes to minerals and the corridors, I'm just interested in terms of timelines. Maybe if you could set concrete steps African countries can take perhaps to make this shift from being resource extraction sites to countries that are not only closing this gap, but also becoming pioneers in these different sectors.
Now,
Minister?
well, very good question. Some steps have been taken by African countries collectively. I spoke about the African Mining Vision, and I also spoke about the African Minerals Resource Development Center that was established in 2016 to ensure that that transition is made from pure resource extraction to value addition. And last year, there was an African commodities strategy also developed. So in terms of the frameworks, we have many. But in terms of concrete action, that's where the challenge lies. In Nigeria, to speak specifically about my country, what we've managed to do was to encourage the private sector on the import substitution track. That's why you see a lot of what Aliko Dangote is doing become reality. Because when I was mining minister, for example, in charge of the industrial mineral sector, what we did was to not just reduce importation of cement into Nigeria, but we then encouraged local production of companies like Dangote Industry in local production of cement. And we moved from about 2 million metric tons within the space of about 7 years to 65 million metric tons and completely reduced importation, because in that space, we only made importation possible for those who are producing locally. If you are not producing, you cannot import. And that's the gap that the Dangotes, the Boas, the Lafarge producing locally were able to then address. And once that was done, we then encouraged them to move into the African market. Today, Dangote has 15 plants in 15 African countries, from South Africa to Zambia to Ethiopia here to Tanzania, all over. And that same strategy is now being looked at in the refining sector. Dangote is talking to East Africa, to President Ruto, to President Suluhu, to set up another refinery, a similar refinery for the Eastern African sector. So we need to really first understand that government cannot do this on its own. Government can set up the enabling environment, put the policies in place, and then support local manufacturers who can then work with technical partners from China, from UAE, from wherever they may be, in order to improve that goal of local beneficiation and value addition. I see that as the main strategy to look at. Of course, you can't stop these big players, China and United States, from still wanting to continue the old model, and they're still doing it. You can see US in DRC Congo trying to set up mineral deals purely between United States and DRC. They will want to do the same with other African countries if you allow them. So the strategy is to then find countries that are genuinely committed to local productivity, even whilst still maintaining their own investment interest in such countries. And I think this is the intersection where a country like UAE can really play actively. And I think it was my brother from Cameroon that spoke about this in the last panel, that let's look at investment in the form of long-term partnership that produces industrial capacity locally, rather than just fly-by-in FPI rather than FDI. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I have maybe, because we are almost...
The question here.
Oh, sorry.
Yes. I'll just ask, Honorable Minister, I was struck by a phraseology you used when you referred to the industrial mining sector. And it got me thinking about the artisanal side. And my question is therefore, is there an ongoing role for the artisanal side of that, which then can also, create a lot of value?
The quick answer to your question is yes. There's a whole chapter in the Africa Mining Vision devoted to the artisanal and small-scale mining, how to formalize them, because it's a big challenge in many African countries. And they're easily taken advantage of by those who want to come into the sector, particularly external players. So what we did in Nigeria was to create what we call, at least in the gold sector, the Presidential Artisanal Gold Mining Initiative, in which we have mineral producing centers locally to procure directly from the artisanal miners, and then create an initiative with our central bank in which this is purchased at the standard international market rate, rather than allow the artisanal miners to be taken advantage of. And that's also what is proposed in the Africa Mining Vision. It's just that it's difficult to realize it, because the mining sector is a capital-intensive sector, highly capital-intensive, and it requires patient capital. Not many countries are able to afford the patient capital required for the sector before it starts bearing dividend later, because it's a long-term process. And artisans just want to buy and sell, and then for people to take it from them, take it to Dubai, or which is a major gold refining market, for example, rather than create local structures to refine and then sell to the international market.
Yes, thank you. I have maybe, just because we are ending the panel, a very last question to all of you, very quick question, because the idea of that is the most important to me in this type of meetings is the idea of partnership. The partnership is why we are here today. We are here because we all want to partner in these critical issues. But most important for me is, what does a partnership that really builds Africa capacity look like? And if we were to have some sort of policy recommendation, very quick, very brief, in one sentence, what is the one thing you would commit to as Africans in the next 12 months to realize a real partnership? What would be the most important measure you would take immediately or in the next 12 months for this partnership to be a real partnership and to create the seeds for a prosperity, for a shared future?
A bit too much, right?
Just a sentence.
Well, I guess there are two Africans there, the three Africans.
Yes. Yeah, but
lean forest.
But yeah. The UAE will begin on that. Yeah.
So I think we are looking for the long term capability building rather than the resource extraction. And this approach is structured on the 3 pillars. I'll say building the connectivity, digital infrastructure, and the skill and knowledge transfer. So I think that the model is to combine the investment. It's looking for investment in technology and collaboration with our partner in Africa.
Mine will be very short. UAE should start with seeking partners from the private sector as a first order of things, and then in the next 12 months they could see what could be done in terms of capabilities, transfer of technology or knowledge impartation to the respective sector. I think private sector is very important, and you could do that one.
So if I just even general ask you, do you see Africa's private sector strong and ready to engage in this partnership? Because the honesty Africa sector is kind of like, and even it's growing
I will say yes, the private sector is ready with a caveat. So long as the ecosystem for investments exists, then it can happen.
Right.
My proposal would be that we really require better understanding of the political economy from our partners. And that understanding should also include where we are on this whole saga of climate change, green energy, and so on and so forth. I'm not averse to it, but if we're saying 600 million Africans require electricity, if that electricity is only going to come from coal, then our partners should understand that what we need primarily for us is energy, because that energy that will then enable us in our infrastructure development. We can complement with solar energy, with renewable energy, but whatever is available in order for us to achieve this is what should be encouraged. So partnership should not be paternalism. It should be cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to thank our very able panelists today and have a round of applause for them. Thank you. And I will finish in thanking as well, I didn't do that at the beginning, the IFA with whom we have a partnership now, Ethiopia, which welcomes us so nicely today, and ECSSR, our partner in crime, for today as well. Thank you. Thank you all.